Hey, everybody, welcome to week 195. Yes, we are counting. It's like it's hard to believe. I say that every time almost, but it still is hard to believe. So, week 190, we had Kevin Monaghan on here. And guess what? Week 195, we have Kevin Monaghan back here because it was too good the last time. We were talking about retention strategies versus incentives and why incentives don't work like we think that they should. And so I think his company is aptly named. It's called Intuitive Compensation Group because it's kind of counterintuitive. Don't you think, Kevin?
Yes. Yeah. Only at the end does it become
Yeah.
intuitive.
So anyway, Jack will be joining us shortly. He is in his Charleston office if he can keep from being distracted by all the boats behind him and all that. And Adam is back. I was worried about you, Adam, because he said, "Oh man, my cell phone's dead." And then guess what?
Yeah.
Millions of people's cell phones are dead because if you're on AT&T, you can't dial in. And so maybe that's why we have fewer people today.
I gotta tell you, I'm not a conspiracy theorist by nature, and at the same time, as I was leaving, my wife was like, "Is everything okay?" And she didn't watch it, but I did. But Julia Roberts has a new movie out.
Oh, really?
That's not happy.
Oh, really?
That basically is all about the end of society as we know it, and and it starts with this. So like I'm not, it's not good. It's like all that I thought about. I'm like, oh yeah,
It's a big promotion. It's a big movie promotion.
Yeah, not so fun. Making fun of all the survivalists now, is it, Adam? So yeah. So I hope it comes back on soon.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, you think about how reliant we are upon technology just for communication, for all of this other stuff. It is kind of frightening. When I was in the streets of New York on 9/11 and people are covered in crap and we're all moving as a herd, there's this bus that has Collateral Damage movie trailer. And then the movie was getting released. It was a teaser for Collateral Damage. I'm like, oh boy, that was just too close to home, man. So anyway, hopefully people are able to get their cell phones back on the AT&T. Who knows? But it probably wasn't an accident. This is just my gut. We'll see. Who knows? But Jack is back. Adam, Jack, before we tee it back to Kevin again, anybody coming on here, Q&A is where we want your questions. I will monitor the chat too. You can harass us, but go easy on Kevin. Now, one other thing, Kevin was a writer on The Office. So you could always ask him some trivia stuff about that. Like if you wanted to just take it into a little tangent, you could always do that. But before we do that,
so wait, I'll pull like the classic Star Trek fan thing. So when Dwight Schrute had Schrute Farms and he was doing the alpacas, what I'd like to know is how did he pick the alpacas instead? I'm just kidding. I don't even know if that was plot line. But anyway, I'll let you off the hook, Kevin. Yeah, there we go.
This was me back in the day. Let's see if I can get this better.
Oh, wow.
There I am with. So if you're a fan of the show, you'll also realize this was the day they were taping the one with where Michael was wearing the woman's suit. And just like my parents, Gary, I was trying to be a writer on The Office. I was the writer's assistant, or on the show we called it assistant to the writers. If you know the program.
Yeah, the assistant to Dwight.
Yeah. So that was a really good job. But making minimum wage in Los Angeles was not a career path I could stay on for very long.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna do a virtual intro to my son, Kevin, because you lived his dream job. He's just about to graduate from SCAD, from their writing and film program, that he's contemplating the move to
Oh,
LA
nice.
to try to get on in a writer's room. So any tidbits you can give him would be
Oh,
great.
yeah, it took me, let's see, 8 months of cold calling. And one time I called because they knew me. They had somebody who had to go to a funeral, and they said, could you fill in for a day? And Adam, all day long with a smile on my face, if they asked me to do something, I ran. So you'd see me running to get it done, come back, what can I help you with next?
Yeah.
And they said, hey, that was season 1. And season 2, they said, hey, we got picked up for another season. We need more people. We liked your enthusiasm. And it worked. So persistence and go to work ethic.
You came with batteries installed.
Yeah. Yes.
We always look for batteries. Did they come with batteries installed, or do we have to go to the store and buy them and then turn them on?
Turn my notifications off. There we go.
Okay. Well, before we launch into some of the myths, and we may even actually have you do a little bit of a repeat, Kevin, just to cue you up here. But Adam, Jack, anything from a current events standpoint besides AT&T outages that you want to talk about?
No, I see my time to the gentleman.
I have two small things that came up during the week, and apologize for the low light where I'm at.
But you got a great background. Like
We
we
get
at
to
least
see
need to
the
hear about,
boats.
like, yeah, that's not a fake background. That's
is.
real deal. And it's like I'm totally jealous because I'm seeing sailing masts and catamarans and all sorts of awesomeness sitting there behind you, Jack.
Yeah, it's a nice place to be. Actually nice and calm and getting a lot of work done. But as I said before, we actually went live. There's people walking around with dogs and a lot of distractions. And every once in a while you hear there's a no wake zone, so you hear the motors kind of just going
Throttle
along,
back.
wishing you were on the boat itself. But two things that I saw this week, which is a listing of Charlotte area office vacancy rates. We had talked about in the past about, do you have leverage with your landlords as you're coming up for renewals? And unfortunately, we at Shoemaker do not. So we're not able to negotiate, at least for several more years down the road. But so the top 3 highest vacancy rates are the NoDOT area, LoSo, so lower South End, which if you've driven through there or even through South End recently, it's just the amount of construction that's going on is amazing, impressive, and makes me want to stay away because I don't want nails in my tires. So,
Yeah.
and then Park Road being and so NoDA 65 points, almost 66%, and then you get down to 45%, 38%. The lowest vacancy rates, I was a little bit surprised that Plaza Midwood is at the top of the low vacancy rate at 2.7%. I know there's limited capacity, but I also know that they are building up that area a little bit as well. And then north of Uptown and Midtown Central are the other two, and then in fourth place is Highway 51. I don't know how relevant that information is because Highway 51 goes completely across east to west down in South Charlotte. So wanted to share that. And then also you may have heard in the news that a Charlotte business owner gets prison time for $720,000 COVID relief fraud.
Wow.
So Evan Perez, 35 years old, obtained $720,000 in a fraudulent PPP and EIDL loan programs. He's ordered to pay it in restitution to the SBA. And he did it various ways. He obviously applied fraudulently, and then he applied for forgiveness fraudulently. So, bad behavior. But the moral of the story is that one of the quotes is that to date, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of North Carolina, which is essentially Charlotte, has prosecuted 28 individuals for defrauding the government funding programs. So, 28 individuals at this point in time. It goes back to, please don't lose sleep at night that, well, if you fraudulently obtained your loan and forgiveness, then yes, you should not be sleeping very well at night. But if you feel like, oh gosh, maybe, did I do it right? Are they going to come after me? Are they going to audit me? Based on reports like this, you should be okay. So just want to provide some assurances on that. And that's it.
I wonder if he was related to the woman that was caught in Neiman Marcus. Same thing. That was early on. Remember that?
Yes, definitely. Yep. And I mean, there's stories like this all across the country, but when I saw this, pertinent to Charlotte business owners. And so, but yeah. And then, the whole, at some point, we'll probably have a refresher on the Corporate Transparency Act and reporting on those, and maybe even create a cheat sheet that if, people wanted to. Right now, I think a couple of weeks ago, so Kevin, I don't know if you saw that one, but it was, I showed the flow chart of the yes and no and getting to the end. Are you a reporter? A reporting person? So things like, even though my paralegal is the one that's filing, I'm also a filer, so I need to get my FinCEN number and all those things. But it's if you formed an entity after January 1st, you're getting down to the deadline. You have 90 days, so about 45 days in if you did it at the beginning of the year, and then everyone else has to the end of the year. I had speculated that if Trump gets into the White House, that this would be rescinded. I was reminded that Trump was the one who put the rule into place, but it was not Trump. It was by the Biden administration that really kind of expanded it. So I did on a prior program say that I do anticipate that it's not going to go away, but I think it'll get back down to maybe what its original intentions were, which is to have reporting requirements on maybe larger transactions, larger companies that may have out of non-US citizen relationships to US entities, because that's really what they're trying to do. They're trying to find the money launderers and the really, really bad guys. And unfortunately, the easiest way to do that is just the easiest way theoretically and academically is to make everyone do what to report. Problem is that logistically, that's almost an impossibility to implement properly because of budget constraints and personnel constraints by the federal government, both on the filing, but more so on the enforcement of the filing. So you end up with people who are going to comply, and but the bad guys aren't going to all of a sudden say, yeah, I guess I got to report because the feds told me to. Not going to happen. So you're going to have a disjointed database, which is not going to be beneficial to anyone really. And so, anyway, went off on a tangent on that. Sorry, but more to come on CTA.
Yeah, I think you're right. We need to tee that one back up for the. Okay, so basically the takeaway, at least Gary Fry's takeaway, was don't call your CPA, call your business attorney. That was the short of it.
Yeah,
but,
we tried not to accept the baton, but we're gonna have to accept it. So yeah, thanks for that. But yes.
Yeah. So call Jack, call your business attorney. And if you are somebody who actually wants to self-serve, maybe what we do is we talk about, here's how, if you want to self-serve, if there is such a thing, here's the stuff. And at least at a bare minimum, here's the stuff to make your bill less expensive by having these things together. Boom, 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 boom. So we can do that. Also, before we get moving, just a reminder, the 200th week anniversary will be a live broadcast in front of a live studio audience at the Hamilton at the karaoke lounge. And so it's going to be limited. I think we're going to limit it to probably the first 100, 125 people. So that's coming up March the 28th. Yeah. So Thursday, same time, same place, only not same place. It's a karaoke place at the Hamilton by Abbott Exchange. So tossing it back over to Kevin, again, we're going to talk about why incentive strategies often don't work for retention, but retention strategies do. And what we might want to do, Kevin, is just reset the table a little bit on this. It's interesting because we had this conversation as an owners meeting earlier, like, and we were talking about, hey, what can we do? What can we do for our employees that are not owners? And, what kind of incentives? I'm like, wait a minute, time out. Listen to week 190 and listen and tune in today. So anyway, here we go, Kevin. Talk to us about why incentives don't work, but retention strategies do.
Sure. Well, let me maybe start with this, just a quick question to the three of you on the panel, and it's okay if there's no answer. But was there any ahas or takeaways? Because what we do, as you mentioned earlier, Gary, can seem somewhat counterintuitive at first. Was there any ahas that you had from last time that you have either seen in the marketplace that you thought of a little bit differently, or experienced and went, hey, maybe it challenged your thinking, or there was a perspective shift that you experienced?
I think for me personally, I'm, similar to Jack, I'm wonky, and I'll own that, and
What's wonky mean?
Wonky meaning like I love the data, I love the research, and I think it was some point early on when you said like there's no study that supports a traditional bonus program as a way of incentivizing behavior, and actually there are studies that disprove this.
It's a long-term study that they certainly, there's enough in the short term.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, cool, that's that. So to me, it was like, okay, let's go with the data and the science. Let's let that be the decider here.
Yeah.
I would say for me, it's yes, I think validation of a Jack theory, that it, actually that's the way it works. I think that I'm also seeing both internally and externally with clients, wanting to embrace it, but it's moving the Titanic degree by degree and accepting it and understanding there has to be intentionality in implementing such a program. And you have to make a decision, same as it was, or making a change and mind shift. And then even if you make the change, you have to implement it, and implement it properly. So if you flip the switch without sharing it and explaining it, and just throw a PowerPoint up and say this is the new program, embrace it, there's going to be resistance, there's going to be suspicion, and it's going to fail. And so I think that's but having the last conversation that we had, it just reiterates you have to be intentional about it and you have to stick to it. And it's going to be maybe painful, because change can be painful when you think that something is working when it really isn't. So I think that's also kind of maybe my last comment is that coming to the conclusion that what you're doing isn't working, and the reason for it, and then the reason for the change.
Yeah, good one.
So I'll weigh in because I took 2 pages of notes 5 weeks ago when we did this. And I'd heard you before, which had a whole bunch of more notes again, because it's just like, it was like fireworks were going off. But you had a statement that said today's incentive is tomorrow's expectation. Woo, baby. Is that the truth or what? I mean, and then you referenced a book called The Road Less Stupid, Bypass the Irrational for the Emotional, which I thought was really a powerful one too. You said that if you create a big win, it's 20 times more effective than an immediate. So this whole notion on delayed gratification and that sense of, hey, there is something. Now, we also understand that if you're starving today, but hey, you're going to be a millionaire down the road, that doesn't help. I mean, that's a dichotomy that doesn't work. But so the floor is yours. You can take us where you want to, but kind of hearing that.
Yeah, sure. And if it's okay, I'll do a quick recap but the three of you are hitting on a lot of the points or the perspective shifts that start the ball rolling. And so I'm going to share my board here. I don't know if your viewers have the ability to make me bigger or go to speaker view, but I'll try and draw big here so that even if I'm up in a corner, you can see. And what we talked about last time was if you've got any employee, retention compensation thinks very different and works very different than incentive-based programs. And what we preach is that retention needs to go way out into the future. Gary used the perfect word, which is delayed gratification. And Jack, everything that you spoke about is the problem with in the struggle with delayed gratification. And from a leadership standpoint, here is why. Like you said, it's very hard to subscribe to the thinking and then let alone implement it because you risk mutiny and all this other stuff. Delayed gratification as a leader is never welcomed by the masses, even the individual, but certainly to impose it across your organization. It's never a welcomed event. The delayed gratification is earned over time and it's imposed by leadership. And that's the skill set that's very difficult because it has to bypass the rational, which is instant gratification. What a leader should seek when it comes to compensation group is to motivate the forces around a big win. And it does not matter. I have seen all sorts of, I write about the 6 pillars of compensation. It does not matter what tools you use. I have examples of just paying people well. That would be Netflix, no rules. And I certainly run into a lot of people who are paying at the top of the spectrum, if not above it already. And that can be a form of retention. It's certainly one that if you have investors or a bottom line can irk you at times. But as far as retention goes, if people know they can't get it better elsewhere, then they can use the money to create their own big win. The problem is that you have to give them a lot of leeway because they might do things like instead of using that money for their big win, they might buy a boat like behind Jack over there. and then all of a sudden they don't have a big win. They go, I need a big win. And they come back to the ownership or the leader and say, I need more money. So, my battle today is more with, unfortunately, the line of thinking that is coming through society, which is pay transparency, pay equity, all these types of programs, which says, hey, a piece of paper should tell you how much you should get paid. And then we can have a philosophy that we pay 70% of that number as an organization. And, work and people don't thrive in that environment. A great example is nature punishes the same. It celebrates diversity. And same is true in business. Is Michael Jordan would have never manifested himself if they said, you need to make the same amount as every other shooting guard. And we're pushing this as a society on people. And what it's doing is it's forcing people to focus on themselves, not the culture, the company, the client experience. It's focusing them on job titles. It's focusing them on, and you used this word before, validation. And if you can have a big win that you're organizing your culture and your people around, that's clear and follows a lot of the psychological rules that it takes to create a big win, which is, this side of the coin is also, as we said last time, it's good ideas. Very smart people think that they can implement good ideas better than others, even though the long-term data suggests it doesn't exist. Harvard, London Economic School, Jim Collins, Good to Great, the institutions we subscribe to preach this to us, but we dismiss them and we say we can do it better. On the other hand, though, this is a big win, is all about the emotional quotient. It's much more emotional than you would think. It's not about the self, it's about the kind of how do we get there together. It's about the team. It's about and the team includes our clients. It's not about the job description. Can I tell you how many people are going to war over changing a few words in their job description because they know that on the benchmarking report online, it's $20,000 more that they can fight in their annual performance reviews? It's not about job descriptions, it's about winning. And this is the type of culture that thrives when the team is winning, when everybody's winning. And your ability to navigate a big win as a leader that shares the success, no matter how you do it, is the key to pulling this off. And finally, the most important thing here, and Jack, when you said this word, I went, that's really my favorite component of it, which is they seek validation. And what creating a big win does is it starts to change that towards fulfillment. And when you have people who are showing up and have a clear path on how their presence at the organization achieves their own sense of self-achievement or self-accomplishment, people are showing up to work to pursue that, which is a much more powerful leverage of productivity and motivation than it is to have them show up and then try to influence them to get rewards. That winds up feeling like control, which negates fulfillment. That was a high-level recap, Gary. How'd I do?
Yeah, I think that's really good. One thing that I would add, you'd mentioned the book, The Road Less Stupid. I would also recommend everybody watch and spend the money. It's $6 or whatever it is on Netflix that you get, or Prime, I think actually, but it's The Boys in the Boat, because that's about a big win. That's about a bunch of underdogs in 1936 that are in an 8-man skull and rowing, and that make it to the Olympics against all odds in many cases, but during the dirty 30s, depression, all that kind of stuff. But that was all about a team win. It was not about individual. You can't win as an individual in an 8-man skull. So just an extra lucky strike extra, but I think that's really good. That's a good foundation point. Anybody, like, we had a lot of kind of interest and discussion last time. I would just encourage anybody on this call, hit us up with, if you disagree or you're like, hey, I hear you, but man, I just can't get it. I just can't make it compute up here. Hit us up with that stuff. But I would say keep rocking. Also, how do you, when you go into a client or you're talking with somebody about this, where their heads are, hey, we need to improve our incentive plan. How do you overcome that quickly with, hey, let's think about this completely differently, because going around the same mountain and expecting a different destination isn't going to get us there.
Right. So in my line of work, which is typically with key players, is the first thing we have to do is describe the big win that the owner gets, right? This is unfortunately, if you are going to find abundance, you need to validate that it's going to be worth it for the owner as well. So if I'm looking at tactics of what works in negotiations on this, the first thing that the business owner or the ownership or investors, whoever it is, or board, first thing that they need to hear is, how do we win? Because it's very difficult to move a needle. This is why incentives are so powerful in our minds, is because there's no increased overhead. And we go, well, if that happens and I make more money, then I'll do this. And so the first thing we do is we go out to the long-term, the big wins for the owner. Once an owner can see that there may be a reason to be more abundant thinking, then the next tactic is to extract what a big win looks like for the employee. And then if you go to Edelman's has a trust index, and if you go to trust index, despite the fact that my clients have great relationships with their key players, if you go to the trust index, the CEO or the owner of an organization sits right between a politician and the media as far as what they will share and the trust index. But an outside expert is one of the highest authorities that you can have. So I'm able to leverage positions that and key in on things that can help both parties. And so the negotiations that come across as appreciated, the ownership starts focusing on their big win. The key employee, not only do they focus on their big win, but many times the key employee is also a very big advocate for doing others, and they just want somebody to fight for them the same way, because if they fight with you, they risk emotional damage. We've had attorneys where the attorneys have tried to push for more pay, and the next thing you know, the cases weren't coming their way anymore. And they remembered that, and so they held things back, which kept two people from being able to kind of come together. So Gary, if I'm just talking about the tactics of how does this shift start, in my world, which is key employee personalized packages, those involve outlining or extracting, both parties going into the future to define, and then our role is to honor the story and put the pieces together.
Could I get a little more granular on that? So if I am pitching it to management or to my partners, in 2 sentences, what would I say to start the conversation? And let me just throw something out there. So, hey partner, how would you like to take the same dollar that we would pay to someone as incentive, and rather put together a retention program, and instead of the return being, 60 cents on a dollar, 110 cents on the dollar, it is double that. I mean, just something like that. There's like, oh yes, please tell me more. So what does those 2 sentences look like as far as giving some objectivity rather than it being subjective and more nebulous?
You outlined a big problem that I had when I started this company, which was we thought that we would serve business partnerships, business owners, etc. And who we wound up servicing was the people's trusted advisors, no more than a long-term business coach was the single greatest way. Because when it came in from the side or below, so like even a key player trying to say, hey, I'd like something like this, it never comes off in a positive light. When it came down from a trusted source, then people would listen. So Jack, if I was to tell you the best success we've had trying to go horizontal, like the C-suite of a company, the single best way would be to say, I want you to read this, and then let's tell me what you think. And that's why we put this one together, because it was too hard of a conversation to have. If I'm putting it together or forced to hone it down to a sentence, it would be, how could we do better than just a dollar out of our pocket into theirs after taxes? So instead of paying out $1 and having it 60 cents go into their pockets, could we find a way to turn that into a more effective, is there a more effective use of the money? And you're going to segue greatly my next point here on when that thinking should start. But there's not a great answer, Jack, and I haven't been able to figure one out elsewise, other than the calling to write the book came because of that exact struggle, which was we could go into a board individually. Because we have to break a lot of frames. The stuff isn't easy and it doesn't make a lot of sense. It fights our natural instincts. So I wrote the book because we would convince a compensation committee on a board to green light it, and they turn around to everybody else, and everybody else went, I don't know. This seems so. So it's hard to come in if you're not going to be either addressing everybody at once or have a process where you're learning together. rather than somebody pitching it. And we wrote the book as a resource to be able to do that.
So two questions. First of all, an unsolicited pitch for Gary's book. I understand that it's on Audible or coming to Audible. Is that correct,
It's
Gary?
on. It's
Okay.
out.
I read the paper. It's one of the few books that I've actually read and not listened to it in the car at 1.6 speed. But so Kevin, and I added the two books that you mentioned today, which is the Road Less Stupid. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
Buckets. Is that available on Audible yet?
Yep,
Kevin?
my missus read it, so it's not my voice because unlike Gary, I couldn't bring myself to go through the torture of 2 days worth of voice recordings for 90 minutes.
Okay, so it is in Audible because I have a 5-hour drive from Charleston to Raleigh today. So now I know what I'm going to be listening to. So thank you for that.
Yep.
So, all right.
Perfect. So Jack, you also bring up another point of, people always ask me when, and Gary, you hit on this before too, which is what if somebody is emotionally struggling or can't even pay today's bills, which is a completely different product.
Yeah.
And so when trying to, that's also the biggest challenge of trying to imply or impose delayed gratification to the masses throughout everybody, is everybody's circumstances are private and unknown, but they might be very stressful. So, implementing it on a mass scale takes a lot of energy, and you're going to have employees that fall into three categories. You're going to have the employees who are ready for delayed gratification and are immediately appreciative of it. These people will light you up because they're on board. Then you'll have people who are the slow goes. They need validation and they have a lot of fears. And you should, and worries. You should build your training and communication around the big win around those. Gary, I can't remember this, but I think we met in 2016 and you said you guys built the accounting firm on people's fears of working with accountants and their frustrations. And that was how you guys started, was here was all the complaints people have. Let's build a great foundation around that. And you took the message and communicated well. A big win should be the same type of thing. Let me give you an example, because many listeners on here, the 401k plan is probably their current big win. And while it can be effective, it takes an incredible amount of financial education and training, because people are not equipped emotionally to handle losing money, particularly when they're stressed.
Yeah.
So, we've seen companies impose, or put in place massive financial education training programs to move the needle. And they would tell you that it was worth it, but it took a long time. And the reason it takes a long time is that third category of people who are the no-goes, who just, they even get upset that anything would be even considered going towards a future win because today hurts and they just can't. So you have to, on one hand, leadership needs to be patient with that group and try to help that group. But on the other hand, it's a challenge because people are showing up with that stress too. And so you have to be able to identify, help, pacify in the short term, or maybe with that group, but they're going to take a long time before they can get to a point where they can even appreciate it. But if you have an internal path and an internal culture that helps those people through, it can be a lot of work, but a lot more rewarding. And that was where the boys in the boat came from, right? These people that they beat out the older, stronger, better on paper version, because these people, they had everything. They didn't have any reason to. You can get a lot more motivation out of that lower group. So another shout out to that book.
I didn't want to spoil that, Kevin, by saying that was basically the JV team that ended up beating out the varsity team.
Yeah,
it was. It was.
I would also say, Kevin, to your point, another constituency within a company that needs the help are the younger people that are just, I remember struggling with that, saying, okay, wait a minute, you want me to put what money where? No, I need to spend this money for two reasons. One, I have necessities, but I went through a lot of pain of graduate school. I want to reap the rewards of it at some point and, go out to eat and not eat, exactly. So I would say that also, and we have that issue too with associates becoming partners who don't appreciate, they're thrown into this new environment of essentially a self-funded, as partners, self-funded 401k versus an associate's 401k, and having to pay taxes on their own versus it being pulled out of their paycheck. So that, what your comments about the financial education of various constituencies is very important.
Yeah. And it's a big lift, right? If so there can be some heavy work, and I'll come back to that point in a little bit. Let's start with this was a graph done by a study done by Princeton, and it was on the emotional well-being of pay. And what this suggested was that, and this was at the time, it would have been about $75,000. What it suggested on this graph is that almost these four emotions that they were tracking, the positive impact of pay, not blue, which was a person's feeling of sadness, and then anxiety or stress-free, and then the latter, which I count as ego. What they noticed was that as people got paid, that below $75,000, which adjusted for inflation today is between 90 and 95, below $75,000 at this time, every dollar of pay that somebody earned had a tremendous lift on a person's happiness levels, a decrease in their sadness and their anxiety levels. This is why in today's society, people will jump for $1 more an hour with almost no loyalty whatsoever, because $1 of pay has something like $10 to $20 of impact in that person's livelihood. And this is what you're fighting against when it comes to trying to create big wins with these people, is that the almighty dollar or instant gratification is here. We interviewed people, Jack, who were from this, who were in the no-go group. They were the people who were not going to buy into the organization. And there's only few programs that we found that have items like this because they're complex to implement. But when we interviewed people, the no-go's took 6 to 7 years to get on board with it. And it wasn't until their friends who started at the same time of them started going, holy crow, you see how big this thing is? And they're like, what? And then they said, he has the same circumstances I do. And as soon as they were able to leverage the peer pressure into this, the FOMO, and this goes along to another really important impact that we see too, which is fear is a far greater driver of motivation and productivity than the control of trying to implement an incentive. That's like, hey, here's additional responsibility. That's not very motivating. But the fear of missing out, when you can leverage fear in your compensation strategy, that can be a powerful driver of change and influence in a person's life. So I bring this study up because it's incredibly difficult to navigate, the lower end of an organization, because this is what you're up against. So that's a little bit more weight, if you will, on it. What it's an indication of, Jack, is that when communicating a big win, and for probably 60 to 70% of people on this call, it's going to be through a 401k system, then you're best served by group education, so that people can start leveraging other people's thoughts. They can start managing their fears together, and the successes can mix in with the others, right? This was one of my favorite studies was you put an A player with a C player, the A player actually decreases a little bit in productivity, but the C players that you surrounded the A player with all rise together. And there's an argument that says, and it's the same philosophy inside of trying to communicate a big win, if that is your vehicle. Then on the other side of this table, what it suggests here is that the people making more money than that every dollar you start paying people over 95 or 100 is actually has little impact on their emotional well-being. You're only getting like 20, you pay somebody $1 more, you're only getting like 20 cents. So why put it in their pocket? More money goes to the government because they're in higher tax brackets, and you have less impact. In fact, the only thing that you are continuing to stroke is the latter, which some people call ego. You're fueling a person's ego, and this goes all the way to the top. Elon Musk, who at one point in time was the richest person on the planet, thanks to the state of Delaware, Jack, maybe we can share your insights on him canceling his package from 2017. But at one point in time, he was the richest person, and he said, well, I'm not the most powerful. Putin's got an army. And it meant that even at the top, there was no fulfillment with this type, promoting this type of emotion. And so my argument, Jack, and here's another kind of tidbit in the ammo to try to convince partners or anything else that maybe we should think differently about compensation strategies, which is a dollar in their pocket the best thing? Should we, are we fueling our own future problems? Let me give you an example that I see a lot in the partnership world, Jack, that causes problems on this level as well, which is most people who are in line for partnership or in partnership are above these levels. And so you're navigating a lot of egos here. But the biggest problem to a working partnership structure or equity structure is there's 4 weaknesses that plague the big win for the younger people. And those 4 weaknesses are going to be time, age, growth, and no growth. These are the 4 frustrations of key employees when it comes to using things like a partnership structure, an equity structure, a profit sharing structure. And an example of that is, I'll use myself as an example. So we had a professional services firm in Shanghai, China, and we decided that we were going to give equity to the rising key players. So we gave out equity to 5 people, and then we grew as an organization. So growth was our problem here. And then time became also, as the longer we went trying to ignore the rising key players in the organization, the more they got frustrated. And so what happened was we couldn't give away any more equity, even though it had worked at the time. Our growth now became, we had all these other people saying, hey, Kevin got equity when Kevin did this. I'm doing more than this. I should get more equity than Kevin. But Kevin switched positions to be more of a leadership position. So those numbers didn't compound for me, but they're using them. And it turned out to be a real big thorn in our side, despite the fact that we would have raised it for years. And this is where the problems start coming in. And we wound up losing a lot of key players down the road when we were facing an exit, and it ruined the exit because we had an abandoned ship by our key players who lacked the upward mobility, and we had fueled their ego. We'd also paid them more. So guess what? They were a lot more resourceful to be able to start their own company as well. So the line of thinking is you want a big win to be inclusive, because if you limit it to if you choose structures that are limiting to people, it becomes harder to communicate the big win, or it becomes less believable. And people then need to think that, hey, I'm not going to continue to work at this law firm because there's no clarity on my time. There's no clarity on how the equity goes from one to the other. And I'm kind of waiting on somebody else's decision. This is why I left Los Angeles and the office, was because I had no control or no clarity over my big win. And I seemed it was in the hands of others. When people lose faith in their self-achievement, in their own version of a big win, it's over. I can tell you the exact day my mind shift. The biggest enemy of of the psychology of the big win is the presence of a disappointment. Our subconscious minds don't understand or process negatives. So it kicks it out. All of our delayed gratification motivation gets shut down when a disappointment happens with our big win. This is another reason that the 401k struggles, is because people go, my big win just fell by 50%. Remember, the subconscious mind can't handle a negative event. Presence of a disappointment now turns to their rational mind, who goes, how am I going to make that up? I got to walk into Gary's office and demand things. And it's stressful for them. Oop, talking to
I have a psychological question for you. So, well, a comment and a question. So a comment, if you were to take that graph and kind of extend it into the higher stratospheres of six-digit compensation, I think what you see is an issue with taking those dollars, and rather than giving it to that person as part of the retention aspect of the program, is filtering those dollars back down as an investment into that. Because when you get in those stratospheres, you have people that have been in organizations for a long period of time who feel like they deserve it. I mean, it goes from benefit, living from privilege to entitlement very quickly in those
Jack,
stratospheres.
that's the opportunity. Right? There's the opportunity. You just labeled the opportunity, which is, how can you turn that conversation of, and you're using the right word, most people see compensation as an expense. What if we make that investment in our lower end people, and we do it to create a big win for them? Where is our big win for doing that? And that's the brainstorming session you should do with your leadership on when creating that. So that,
I think another challenge too, and not to bring faith into this, but at some point when there's people in those stratospheres, at some point, I think you have to bring in external factors, and you have to be around people who believe, how much is enough? How much do I need or want? And how do I invest down the road for that long-term benefit? As you get older, and your perception of the number of years that you're going to remain on this earth, then you start, I see this, not necessarily in our organization, but I mean, certainly there are the people that are in it for themselves within my firm and with any firm. But you get through that. But I think you need to be surrounded by people who understand the investment that they, I think, are required to do as a social contract with their co-owners, to filter that money down and to defer that enjoyment of that small success, maybe, to create a large success for the entire group. So it goes back into, okay, what is the long-term benefit for all of us versus a short-term benefit for me, because I have to maximize my wealth. And people will convince themselves that's what they have to do. Oh, I have to provide for my kids. I have to, for my grandkids, I have to do this. I have to leave a legacy and all these things. And so so my question is, how have you seen success in getting past that? People who are just mindset that way, you're not going to change them. But to say, hey, look at this in a longer term fashion with someone who is a naysayer initially. So what would you say is the magic pixie dust, at least initially, that has been successful that you've seen?
You're welcome to, you just kind of outlined my world, which is pay is much more emotional than you think. And here's how I would spin what you said back to you. The concept of enough is probably the biggest barrier to thinking this way. Money can never satiate enough. That's why incentives can never be, can never satiate this. But emotion can find enough. And that's the difference. And that's the challenge, because everybody's emotions are going to be interpreted different. Remember, my programming, much of it has been done in my teen years or less. My programming and how I receive things is very different than Gary. First thing I did on this call was I said, what did you take away? You guys took away 3 different things, 3 different perspectives, because that's how your brains filter. And this is the problem with the bonus plan. You give out the same bonus to everybody. One person's like, thank you so much. 4 people are angry for different reasons.
Exactly.
So, Jack, I really like your insights. You hit on I think you dance on a lot of the belief systems that I have now being in this space, and you see I think you can see the end result, and it's like, well, here's where everybody thinks, how the heck did we get there? And there's not a one answer, because everybody's going to have to think of it different. But here's what I leverage when I have conversations or in the negotiations of these packages, is there's no interest like self-interest. My line of work is the reason that we isolate is so that I can extract an individual's big win and play with the emotions there, and then align a story that brings both together. Much more difficult when you're not isolated to do it in group, but I mean, to go down the line past what I do, which is just very, limited number of people at a company. You have to start thinking in groups, and it's a lot more intentional. And that's not my specialty, but there's a lot of people who help people bridge the gaps of communication to get messages across. And a good question, as we're kind of running out of time here, that the leaders on this conference can ask is, how are we communicating our big win down the ranks?
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote clarity. We can never be clear enough, I think. But when we have crystal clear clarity of what a win is and what success means, as far as in terms of your job performance, all of that kind of stuff. And that's a huge thing, whether it's applying to, retention strategies or not. Driving for clarity. What does success look like in this job, in your performance, as a team win, as an individual win, etc. And I love, I took more notes again, but describing the big win the owner gets, you got to start there, because, that's what they're concerned about. And it's not a bad thing. It's just what it is, right? And then describe what the big win is for the employee. Okay. That's simple enough. It takes brain power to think about it.
What if you can get your leadership team communicating, down the ranks, and find what works for your culture, your people. I've seen them all work. Like I can tell you, I was talking about the negatives of equity before. I've seen companies do great things with equity. Jack Stack's book.
Oh yeah, The Great Game of Life.
Yeah. He created an ESOP, which is everybody gets a little bit of equity. I really liked I follow Jack Stack because there's very few working incentives that have lasted as long as some of these. So I study them relentlessly. And what I liked best about him was the bonus structure was simple. It actually felt like pay. You could earn we'll pay up to 13% bonus. That's it for everybody across the line. Feels like pay just for everybody. But then the big win became the ESOP, and they were able to communicate that. They built a whole strategy around it. And 40 years later, he's still very good. I just picked up another tidbit from him too, which was he had a great way of communicating annual expectations of pay raises. What he did was because remember, everybody got free money. Even employees were like, well, you got all this PPP money. I should get a big raise too. And there was all this upward pressure on raises. And the owners were meeting the demand because people were throwing money trying to get their people away. What Jack Stack does is he changed the conversation. He went out of the short term, and he would go into 5 years, and he would highlight, because the world's always ending, he would highlight, hey, there's a big recession here. How do we keep everybody's pay? How do we keep everybody paid? And how do we keep growing at a safe level to meet those expectations? And what happened was the employees went out of thinking about the self. They went about thinking about everybody keeping their jobs, and it allowed them to problem solve, not focus on their job descriptions or what Sally was getting this year. It's like, oh, we got to work together. That was just this year. But studying people and following people like Jack Stack was a powerful way to improve the leadership skills it takes in pay.
Yeah, that's a great
Sorry, go
point.
ahead.
ahead.
I know we're at the noon hour, but so in prior sessions, we've talked about not being presumptuous and not thinking you know what your employees want and desire. And we talked about, okay, asking them what's good, what's bad, what you want to see more for this coming year. Would you add to that, asking them about what maybe like they think the big win is, or what would be success in their mind? And I ask that for two reasons. One is you may say yes because you want to know, but you may say no, at least not in a group setting, that because you talked about the individual kind of chatting with people. So I think I maybe just answered the rhetorical question, but would like to know what you have to say.
Yeah, it's my skill set and specialties is with the top of the organization. If I was to take the lessons and apply them, Jack, how I'd say this is going back to what I said earlier, which is delayed gratification, any form of it, is not welcomed. It's got to be imposed by leadership. Leadership itself is a game of delayed gratification.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
You have to pick a strategy that fits your culture, that just like anything else, you're gonna push these values through and rally around them. So the big win should match your culture, your core values, and go from there, and be happy to spend more time on kind of outlining all the choices a business has to create wins, but we are up on time.
Yeah, this is good. You brought up an ESOP, and I think we talked about ESOPs a long time ago, but it might be worth doing. I was with a guy this week, and we were talking about something, and they're a couple $100 million company, so it's a good sized company. But he's like, "Oh yeah, I got to think about that expense," because he was thinking like an owner.
Yeah.
And he I mean, yeah, he is but he's not that high in the ranks, which is really interesting to me.
Yeah,
So
there's positives and negatives to each choice. And the ESOP, I say, is all 6 pillars wrapped in one. You get all of the positives, but you get all of the negatives. And one is entitlement, because everybody thinks they're an owner.
Right.
Even if they're not the main shareholder. People, once they're partner, might get a little, well, I don't have to do that work anymore. And I don't know if that's true, Jack, or you relate to that, but you smiled. So
it still comes down to the right people, right?
Yes.
Because, and it's mindset. You touched a lot about it today. So anyway, we are 3 minutes past. Thanks for hanging with us, people. I'm in Kansas next week, so it's my mom's 89th birthday. So I'm flying back to Kansas. So you guys are on your own. I will not be able to join, and I don't even know that she has cell phone service out there.
Oh boy.
So anyway,
Adam, it sounds like we have a lot of free license to do whatever we want.
oh yeah, man, you can take it wherever you want. Cats away, the mice will play.
Yeah.
All right, guys, have a wonderful one. Kevin, thanks again for being on here. We really appreciate it.
You got it. Always a pleasure.
All right.
Yes,
See
thank
y'all.
you.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye.